people hold companies responsible for things, their own shortcomings, right? And it's like your problems are not my problems.
But there is also like a human part.
Yeah, of course.
That you want to do things for your customer. But I will say that I am becoming, through these experiences, more and more emotionally removed from the business. And it's harder in the beginning, but I'm definitely getting better at that. And it's not like a good thing or a bad thing, but my priority is to generate revenue for my business. And if you are a worthwhile customer, if you're a good customer, we will do anything for you. But in the end, like if you're just demanding and you want to cheat us and you want to find loopholes, like I don't have to do anything for you. Welcome to ProfitLed Season 2, our Journey to a Million, Episode 18. I'm Melissa Kwan, co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host. And I'm here with Todd Parmley, my co-host, eWebinar's COO. Hey, Todd, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I was just thinking about how, we're rehashing a lot of things that, was in the first 3 years of our company, because it took 36 months from launch to get to $1 million. And a lot of this stuff seems like a long time ago, but it's not really that long ago because we're approaching our 4th year in business, like in the next 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, I have the same experience. It feels like, wait, when was that? But I know it's not that long ago, but I think it's just the nature of how quickly you cycle through things in a company of this size that's moving as quickly as we do, is that, we don't move lightning fast, but we move pretty quick, I think, compared to others. And so it feels like 17 lifetimes ago.
I mean, sometimes I feel like that about my own travels. I'm like, what? We were in Croatia in June, and June was 2 months ago. That seemed like last year. But definitely like in startups, I think you're living dog years. And a big part of me still feels like we're like in survival mode, trying to make it. This is like a very early startup, but we're break even. Some months we're profitable. Like, everyone's almost getting market salaries, but like definitely good salaries. That was a big goal for the last 12 months. And honestly, everyone's working a lot less right now. More chill. I think people are more chill. Less pressure to like make this thing on a certain date. Like we're doing way less campaigns, promotions, features we promised, right? Like everything we add right now is something above what was asked for.
Yeah. And I think because we've hired good people for things like support and for help with content, that certainly it's freed me up to spend more time on the things also that I really love to spend time on, which is product stuff. And then what that translates to is a better result. So it's been super rewarding. So I feel like I'm not only working with less urgency, but I'm focusing more on the things that I really want to put my time and effort into. So that's great.
Yeah. And some of these things that we're rehashing on these episodes are like kind of cringy. We're like, wait, we did that? Why did we do that? And hopefully we will save someone else from the same pain, even if they're going to try it again. Or like, even if they're going to try what we tried, hopefully by knowing we did something that didn't work, that they would know that's the norm, not the exception.
Here's what I think is more likely. Because I think it's human nature to be like, oh no, I'm the exception. I'll try it. I mean, that's what I was saying at the end of last episode was like, if we heard this podcast, would we do anything differently? I don't know if we would have, but possibly someone will try something. And then when they are starting to realize it's not working, they'll hear, our words echo in their ears and be like, oh, wait, this is what's happening. I don't need to pursue this to death.
But a lot of times when I think back to the mistakes that I made, it's because I didn't talk to my peers. Or I didn't believe them, or I didn't notice a red flag that someone else told me was a red flag. And I guess like as a founder, you also need that kind of conviction and naivety, but knowing when to give up and say no and walk away and try something else is also a superpower.
Yeah. I mean, definitely like if we knew how hard it would be, would we have started at all? So there is value in just like charging ahead with conviction. I do think that that's really common with any very small business. You just don't have people to bounce things off of. You have to create a network. Otherwise, when you make decisions in a vacuum, sometimes it's a lot harder to tell if you're doing the right thing. So,
well, in the last episode, we talked about price perception. and how pricing impacts your business and the types of customers you have and how much revenue you get. We also talked about the types of users that we've worked with who never activate, by the way, mostly free ones. And if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. It's one of my favorite quotes from an old manager of mine when I was selling real estate. And today we're going to talk about how the customer is not always right, which seems a bit like an extension of the last episode. We'll share some customer horror stories and how we've dealt with those situations. And this topic actually reminds me of, do you remember there was a blog called Clients from Hell?
Yeah, that was like on it was like Tumblr years.
How old was that? Like it was on Tumblr, and it was like, I think it was started by like a designer or like design firm. People would just like submit like maybe anonymous entries of like what happens with their clients from hell. And because I was doing this episode, I actually Googled clients from hell. That Tumblr blog is still around. And there's also a website that was the first search result called Not Always Right. Yeah. So I was like, oh, cool. So what do you think? Like, is the customer always right?
No. That's my short answer. But like the long answer is it's easy to get defensive. I think in an internet world, like especially in a digital business, the anonymity of the internet tends to bring out the worst in people, right? I mean, it's like that's like the idea of a troll didn't really exist before the internet in the sense that we use it now. It's like someone can hide behind their anonymous identity and just be assholes. And I actually think that it really does feel, at least in the US, like people are really kind of angry all the time and really divided. But I think that some of this like online meanness has like trickled into real life. So people are already like hair trigger to react in a bad way. I mean, like I live in New York City. We expect customer service to be terrible. So like we know that we're going in and you have two options. Like you can be, as a customer, I think I'm actually pretty good. I try to, like not go ballistic.
But I don't think that about New York. I think what people get most wrong about New York is service is bad, but I think service is direct and efficient, which is not the same as bad. Right? Like, I think people in New York just like, they want to get it over with. They want to know what you want. It's like asking for directions, right? Whereas a lot of people don't come from New York. So they expect this like, kind of real like niceness, like whether it's West Coast niceness or Canadian niceness, like they expect to be served. But I actually think in New York, the service is great because you just get what you want. And I love that.
No, but you learn to develop a thicker skin where you don't take things personally. People ask for what they want. I mean, I actually have a funny story about this. I moved to New York from Salt Lake City, which is like a bubble of niceness, right? Like niceness is valued above everything. So I moved to New York and I come crashing into this new way of being. And it was tough for me at first. I didn't get it. I grew up on the West Coast, but then I adjusted. And then I had a bunch of stuff that I had to go back to Utah to get. And I went back to Utah and I walked into the Target there and there was a greeter who was just there to say hello to me. And he's like, welcome to Target. And my first internal reaction was like, what do you want from me? I thought maybe I've been in New York a little bit too long. So there is a balance between being kind and also being direct.
Well, I mean, I remember I moved to New York from Canada, and very shortly after that, when people meet me and I say I'm from Canada, they'll be like, oh, but you sound like you're from the US. And I'm like, what does that mean? And then people in Canada would start asking me if I'm from the US. But I've always been, pretty direct. But like, I think part of the reason why we feel like the customer is always right is because of companies like Amazon and Costco that basically invented these this idea that you can do anything as a customer. Like, we will always serve you. Customer service is number one. So as a consumer, we've been so spoiled with these massive conglomerates because we can return anything. But these are companies that can afford this approach. Mostly, by the way, because they pass the cost back to the vendor, right? Like everything in Costco is on consignment. If it doesn't sell, if you return it, I'm giving it back to the vendor. But as a startup, like I can't do that.
When the margins are so small, like it takes so much energy to deal with a terrible customer that it's just not worth it. And if you have a bad customer who continues to be a bad customer, you're going to be living with that bad customer, right? Now, I think it's important to point out, though, that like people react and can say like crazy things. A lot of times, if you can see beyond what they're saying and kind of point out, like, is this the problem that you're experiencing? You can move past their negativity without taking it personally. But when someone is just being belligerently like mean, then like show them the door.
You know, you brought up being able to hide behind a computer or even the phone gives us a different personality. And, you know, that happens in online dating as well, right? Like I know people, like friends of mine that are amazing people as my friend, but when they go on an online date, like they're a complete asshole. And I'm like, why do you do that? Like, it's almost like this digital wall allows you to have this different personality. And I remember going to a conference where the BombBomb co-founder was there. And BombBomb is like it's like a Loom for, you know, sending messages to, you know, to clients or your friends, right? And the whole premise was built on the fact that, you know, if we talk to people in real life, like we talk to them over digital support, it would be socially acceptable. Can you imagine? Like, do you remember like those SNL skits? Like these celebrities would read their like Twitter. Like you would never say that to someone. Like you'd be psychotic.
Exactly.
Have you ever been a client from hell for someone else?
Yeah, I think so. We were trying to find a couch, right? So I was researching couches. And with all of these couches, you can't actually see what they're actually the final price is going to be unless you put it in the cart and go all the way to the very end. So that's what I was doing. And one of them, I clicked purchase completely by accident. And I was like, oh shit. So I go immediately online. There's no place to cancel. I send them an email and, you know, they're charging me a fee, a restocking fee for a click. It escalated all the way to the top of the company. I mean, I wasn't a complete jerk, but I was like, this is insane. And I think that that's another thing is that people like, you still want to be a human being. And there is like this reputational capital that has, I mean, I went to their Better Business Bureau page. They were like 1.2 out of 5. And I was like, and so there is a way that I think that consumers try to wield reviews and things like that as like a weapon against you. And they'll say like, I will give you a 1-star review. I'll tear you apart, which we've had happen. And from maniacs. And some of these sites, we can't even reply. So it's just like, you just got to move on.
I think what's most important is like understanding that just because you're a startup or just because you're any company doesn't mean the customer is always right. Because if the customer is always right, you're in a world of pain. And the companies where the customer is always right have a massive team of support people who are actually quite low level. Like a lot of like ticketing agents are like the people that respond to tickets are super low level. They're outsourced. They're not really emotionally connected to the company. The company's so big already. It's a job. And that's what makes it really frustrating also when you actually need to get something done. But consumers don't feel like people who respond to tickets need to be treated as equals. But at a startup, everybody, including the founder in the beginning, does support. We've been around for 4 years. We only stopped doing support like 6 months ago because we couldn't hire a support person that could really stand up on their own and knew what they were doing. So it took us that long. But like CTO David, myself, and you were all doing support whenever we could. And I think people bring the attitude that they have, you know, from this sofa company that kind of just tricked me into buying it to any company, or the attitude that they give Amazon where the company doesn't care about the product that they lose, to us, which is actually a service business.
Yeah. I mean, so we're a small team. We're the ones fielding support, and we have really important things to focus on. So it's like at a certain point, it really is a detriment to keep trying to cater to certain customers. The best possible thing for us to do psychologically, but also just straight up from a business point of view, because of the time and effort that it takes, is just to let them go. And I think it's important to point out, we don't do phone support. Phone support takes so long. Oh my God. My favorite is when people get so annoyed that we don't do phone support. And then I'm like, what's your question?
But also, like, how many things you use every day don't provide phone support?
Yeah. I mean, almost every software product doesn't have phone support. But then they'll ask their one question and you answer it and it's done. And you're like, why did you need to get me on the phone? Like,
so I did phone support for like a total of 5 days in the past, like in my previous company. And I didn't know this. I was like fairly new founder, and I had my cell phone on the website. And, I was, serving real estate agents as well, because the last company was in real estate tech. I was masochistic for sure. And because it's so hard to get someone on the phone, people find a number, they call you at all hours of the day, by the way, and they would ask about anything outside of your product, and sometimes just have a chat because you are now on the phone. So they'll be like, oh, but like I was also trying to upload this like thing on Facebook. Like, how do I do that? Maybe you're tech savvy. Maybe you can help me. It's crazy. But also, we as a company, like, we don't make enough to live with that pain. Like, if you're paying me like 10 grand a month, you can actually say a lot of things to me, but you're not. So our tolerance for bullshit, I guess, and meanness and aggression is very, very low. And because we value our team's time so much, and it's so hard for us to recruit as a bootstrap company, we don't want them to be discouraged, right, by dealing with aggression, right? And so, like, I guess some like customer horror stories that we could share. I think number one is like something you already touched on, is like very demanding and rude people coming to support. Like, I just signed up, this didn't work. How can you not have it? Respond to me right away. Like, and then they just send like 20 messages, all caps. And you're like, whoa, do you know that if you message a big company, like, and back then we were responding like within the hour, like sometimes 15 minutes. Do you remember when I was like glued to my phone? And if you message a big company, like a Salesforce or a Stripe, like, you won't hear back for days. And then the person will ask for your question and go check with someone for days. Like, I had a ticket with Stripe for 2 months. And every time they came back, they'd be like, oh, but it's your problem. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, they just don't know how to solve it. So, but people are more forgiving with big brand name companies because, oh, they're busy, they're big. But with small companies, they feel like they can step all over you. So the way that I've always dealt with unreasonable and aggressive customers, because this has such an impact, a negative impact on the support team when it's handled by leadership and when it's not. Because when you're doing support, or when David's doing support, like, yeah, you're not a support agent, but I don't want you to be discouraged. So I've always been the one to step in to manage the situation and to set the standard and let people know that you can't speak to us like that. Like, we are not that type of company. Would you like to cancel?
And you don't have to be a jerk about that, but you can be it's about being direct and just saying, you can't treat our team like that. I'll say that I've had this happen at other companies too. It is incredibly, what's the opposite of demoralizing? Moralizing, it's not it. But when leadership does step in and do that, the team feels incredibly valued because they know you have their back.
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, that's primarily the reason I do it. And especially like in the last year when we've hired like our first support person and our second, I want to make sure they know that they can speak up. Like, we do not let people speak to us like that. We do not let people disrespect us. Like, that's really important, because if you don't set the tone for how you treat each other from the very beginning, it's going to continue and continue and continue. And in my last company, there was this one customer that, like, he was from New York, of course, but every time he came in, he would just be super demanding. And every time his email came in, like, our hearts will stop. We'll be like, what does he want now? To a point where I had to reach out to him. And, we were an enterprise product back then. So maybe a part of him felt like he could do that. And I just told him, I was like, listen, like, every time you email, we don't know what you want. Like, we don't work for you. And like, even if we did, like, this is not the way to speak to your team. Like, you just don't make people feel good when your request comes in, and nobody wants to work for you. So everything kind of shifted at that time, but it's so important as a leader to set the tone for how that relationship will be for the rest of your journey with that customer.
And some customers will adjust. Like, if you set a clear boundary, like, you can't, like, they'll back off. Some won't. They'll like burn the house down, right? But some will adjust, and then you move on. You have a greater relationship with that customer. But just letting them walk all over you is terrible.
We've definitely had situations where that happened. And I'm like, listen, I'm going to cancel your account. You know, usually these are people who just signed up, right? Like, maybe still in trial. I'm going to cancel your account. We'll refund you or whatnot. Please go to one of our competitors. There are other solutions that do the same thing. And they get so mad. There are some people that get so mad. We've definitely had like 1-star reviews from people who would say, they don't write the situation in the review. They're like, these people canceled my account in the middle of a webinar. It's like, okay, well, first of all, we would never do that. But it's happened. Like, our 1-star reviews are from people where we're like, yeah, we're going to just let you go.
Yeah. And also 1-star reviews where they talk about how bad the product is, and we know they never even used it. Like, they were like within 2 days, so they couldn't possibly. So they're just, and people do that. They use reviews as a weapon. So I know there's other ways in which the customer is not right. I know we've talked about people misusing our trial, kind of hacking our system. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think this happens to like every SaaS company, right? Like, people want to use things for free. They sign up multiple accounts. And sometimes like it is because they didn't get to try the product and they wanted to extend the trial, or, you know, they just sign up for it with a different address, which is fine. I'm not talking about those. But there are people who use the product as much as possible. So in the beginning, when we launched our product, we didn't have any limits. And this is one of those things where we look back and we're like, why didn't we think of that? But our 14-day trial had no limits of usage. So you could, have as many webinars as you want, no limit on video size, no limit on registrants, no limits on the number of emails that you send, like the follow-ups, reminders, and all that. And people would come in, use it to its maximum, right? And these are mostly people who are like solopreneurs using to sell something, right? Like buy this course for $2,000, but in the next 5 minutes is, $200. It's those guys. So they're making money from these webinars, but they are pumping ads into it. So they actually don't care if they keep the same email. A lot of these are like Gmail accounts, right? So it's like a throwaway account. And because their company name is the same. And they have a subdomain with eWebinar, so nobody knows like who they are. So we had, quite a bit of those, especially for the first, 2-3 years, that was sign up multiple accounts, misusing the trials, draining our resources. Signing up with fake credit cards was big because we require a credit card, and it will charge on the 14th day, but you have a 7-day grace period. So we only plugged that hole recently, actually way after $1 million ARR. So what that meant was they could use the product for 21 days for free. And the people who use this multiple times, they figured this out.
But then we also like dropped the limit during the free trial, right? It's like we did so many things. And I know like right now it looks like we were so naive. I mean, and we were, right? Like we didn't restrain streaming, like size of the files, number of registrants. It seems crazy now, but I think the nature of these types of problems are almost always going to be reactive. And so you just gotta like plug those holes as quickly as you can.
Yeah. And a lot of these holes don't cost you a lot. It's just annoying because you're spending a lot of time building the product. You want people to value it. And here's someone that's pumping in 10,000 registrants, 20,000 registrants, making tons of money and not willing to pay you $49 or $99. It doesn't feel good.
No. But also, we were able to turn registrants into a subscription add-on, right? So we actually went through that process, which I think was mostly you, of calculating the actual cost of a registrant for us in terms of like all of our costs, and then creating an add-on, and that generated a lot of new revenue for us.
I mean, there was a number of things that we did, right? Just to kind of like, I guess, sum this up in a nicer way. It wasn't just people like misusing the trial. It was also like misusing the product within the trial. So they were finding loopholes in the product while using the product for free because we didn't have those limits. And we actually never really sat down to look at what that costed us. And that was a bit of a shock, right? And like, because there was one guy that injected a bunch of attendees during the trial, and we ended up losing, $8,000 in 10 days. And where did that come from? It was all streaming costs, right? Because you need a video in order to use eWebinar. So he uploaded a video and he pumped a bunch of ads in. And so every stream was money.
Right. And you could argue that these aren't like bad customers. People are going to do, if you let them do it, if you let them get away with it, they will take advantage, right?
But he signed up for us because other platforms had a limit and he didn't want to pay for Vimeo. So he found that we didn't have a limit. But when that happened, I was like, because we have a Slack channel that basically just says like, Todd has signed up for a webinar, Melissa signed up for a webinar. And there was this 10-day period where it never stopped. And in the beginning, we were like, oh, cool, like big user. But I'm like, wait a second, like this person has been in here. Like this person is pumping a lot of people in. Like how much is that actually costing? Because I think at that point, like our backend is Vimeo. I think Vimeo might have contacted us and was like, hey, you're using up your bandwidth. And it was like Q1 where we pay for the year and we pay a lot. So I'm like, what is happening? And it was only until that person that found this loophole that we were like, how much does our streaming actually cost per registrant? And then the first thing we did was we canceled his account because I reached out to him. I didn't do it right away because I wanted to give him time to like tell his customers. We knew we were losing like $1,200-1,500 a day paying for his streaming. And we basically reached out to him and said, hey, this is happening. We want you to keep using this platform, but we don't want to lose money. If you want to keep this account alive, you're going to have to pay us. And he agreed to pay us. And then when I told him it was this much money, he refused to pay us. So we cut him off right away. But we, that period was like 48 hours or whatnot, where we tried to connect with him and like understand his business and how can we work together, but he didn't want to. And previous to that, he was using like YouTube, and YouTube wants the views. So we implemented first was a size limit to the video, which we never had. So if you had a video that was like 1 gig versus 20 gigs, we would let you upload that. But how much we get charged is based on the size of video and how long you watch. So we ended up putting a limit to the size of the video. So forcing people, a lot of times, like when you have a 10 gig video, you can shrink it to like 1.5 without affecting the quality of the webinar, right? This is not a movie. So we force people to do that. Some people are not happy, but it is what it is. Like for us to keep the cost, because we had to calculate the cost of a registrant, the average number of attendees, like people that actually view it. Like we did that for a course of like 6 months before we implemented these add-ons.
Yeah. And we also came up with a reasonable workaround, which is like, if you want to have some massive video, then we integrated with Vimeo and said, you can host it in your own account. And you can pay for that and do it yourself if you have to exceed our file size limits. So I felt like we adjusted pretty well to all of these things. Do you remember when we were allowing people to inject registrants into webinars with Zapier, and it like completely destroyed our email deliverability? Oh my God. Like basically all our emails stopped being delivered because all of these like fake emails were being injected into our system. And so, you just have to adjust quickly and listen to the intent behind the customer. And if you can, give them a solution, but like, you got to protect your business.
And because the number of registrants impact a number of attendees. Number of attendees are people that watch your webinar. So by nature, a fraction of people that register are going to watch it. So the more people watch it, the higher the bandwidth, the more we pay. So the more, in theory, we needed to charge, and we never had that limit. We never calculated the actual cost, right? So it really wasn't until like year 2.5 that we really started looking into that. But instead of making our product more expensive, we made those limits an add-on. So you could use the product, like 95% of the product, in, as much as you want. But for the power users, and we calculated something like less than 5% of our users at the time were power users. If you are a power user, then you would pay for it, which is very fair. But it also meant that we had to build in a subscription mechanism to handle add-ons, which we didn't have, which was why we delayed that decision quite a bit. It just had to be, slotted, right? But basically, we introduced limits to the video, limits to the number of registrants. That did not impact 95% of our customers. But for the 5%, they needed to pay, $50 for an extra 1,000 registrants every month, because the more registrants you have, in theory, the more money you're saving or the more money you're making. So we thought that $50 was a fair exchange for that. And no one has ever complained about that.
So can you think of any other examples of bad customer behavior? Or did we?
I mean, I think what you touched on is like, we didn't have a limit to the number of emails that we sent. And there were a couple times where, there were like spammers that, used like a random IP address that was using us to send out spam, right? Like whether it was like a Nigerian prince or like, or whatever it is to like click on, or like a Bitcoin scam or whatever. So they would like create a webinar, inject a bunch of emails in it, and we would send out the reminder. Yeah. And I forgot, there was something that was, I think there was one spammer that used like any video, because you can use any video and to create your webinar. I think he used like a video of like otters. And then he used our email system, and actually, I think what he didn't realize was like he was inviting people to join his webinar, but the video was like otters. We cut that off right away, and then we put in measures to verify email addresses through, two different solutions. So, I mean, we basically just evolved the product to handle these cases. And, other customer horror stories are, things we touched on, like people that like sign up, use a product, already had used the product, but wanted a refund because they're like negatively. I mean, in the beginning, I never gave them. I just didn't, because I don't have to. And I know like, that's not something that a lot of founders or, executives would agree with. It goes against customer service, but in the beginning, we needed the money. But I'm not stealing from a customer. You sign up, you agree to this 14-day trial. We remind you 3 times, like 2 times more than most people. We remind you 3 times through an email that your trial is coming to an end. We give you the cancel link in the email. You still forget to cancel it.
And then we remind you when your subscription is going to renew. So
yeah, and I think like the ones that I feel like are like clients from hell are more people that use the product and then decide, oh, I don't want to pay for it, so you should give me a refund. And if you don't refund me, I'm going to give you a bad review on social, or I'll say things about you on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, now I think if people contact us the day of the payment, like we'll refund we're not monsters, but like people who have been using the product and then want a refund, no way. Yeah.
So I always check if people are like, oh, I forgot to cancel. Can you refund me? But I'll see, did they use the product in this cycle? Like if you've had attendees, if you've run webinars, then like, yeah, you can cancel anytime. Like we're like back then, for the longest time, we didn't have annual plans. So we're not charging you a lot. But if you use the product, then, and every month we send you an invoice to remind you that you're subscribed to it, then, you have ample time to cancel. But since we doubled prices, we are much more lenient. And of course, like at the closer we got to break even, the more lenient we got to like refunds, because it's just not worth the pain anymore. And now, like if people really didn't use the product, they really forgot to cancel, then, we just refund them. But we definitely check if it's a repeated case. And now we also, on the back end, have built-in mechanisms to recognize the same credit card, but different emails. So I keep an eye, like if it's somebody who has signed up multiple trial accounts, because now we have limits on the trials as well. So that's the other thing that we change. So like we put limits, not just on each plan, not just registrant limits on each plan, but registrant limit on the trial. There is no reason why you need more than a few hundred attendees to your webinar before deciding if this is a good enough product for you. But back then, people would put in like 10,000 registrants in 14 days and we'd be fine with that.
I mean, knock on wood, it feels like we've closed the final loopholes, but I'm sure somebody will find some workaround that we don't know about. But it does feel like we finally figured out all the ways to stop this bad behavior.
There was one case a few weeks ago that it is just so disheartening when these things happen, because they're also ruining someone else's chance of getting great, in theory, great customer service, right? So like a few weeks ago, we had this one company, I think it was probably like a solo company, a solopreneur company as well, that was like, I have a big webinar coming up, my credit card, my credit card got hacked, so I don't have a new credit card until, next week, or like in 2 weeks. I don't know. It was a long time. It was like 2 weeks or something. But she was actually being quite rude. She was like, you need to do this. How dare you? I have a webinar and I don't have a credit card. I'm like, but do you have a personal credit card that you can expense? And then, of course, I threatened to write about us on social. How dare us cut their service because there's something they can't control. And that what they wanted was us to extend the next billing for 2 weeks. And so finally, I'm like, okay, fine. Then this person was like, I will back pay you for the 2 weeks that you're extending. I promise, you can trust me, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. So we actually did that. And sure enough, next billing comes, credit card fails. I reach out to them, no response. And this is someone that's been using a product for a few months, have actually paid for a few months, right? So it seemed legitimate, but it's stuff like that reminds me that we are here to run a business. We're here to scale a business, and we are not here to make friends.
Yeah. And also, how the hell is it our problem that it's like people hold companies responsible for things, their own shortcomings, right? And it's like your problems are not my problems. But
there is also a human part.
Yeah, of course.
That you want to do things for your customer. But I will say that I am becoming, through these experiences, more and more emotionally removed from the business. And it's harder in the beginning, but I'm definitely getting better at that. And it's not a good thing or a bad thing, but my priority is to generate revenue for my business. And if you are a worthwhile customer, if you're a good customer, we will do anything for you. But in the end, if you're just demanding and you want to cheat us and you want to find loopholes, I don't have to do anything for you.
Yeah. And I think detaching from it is really important. And detachment doesn't mean you become a jerk. You can detach and still be kind, polite, whatever, but you're and set boundaries. Be like, no, thank you for asking. They're not mutually exclusive things. So I think detachment is actually kind of the key. You can't take this stuff personally when you're this small. And the business means so much to you and you're so proud of the product. It's impossible to not take things personally, but it is a skill you can learn you start to realize that people, given the opportunity, will behave badly, and to expect otherwise is insane.
Yeah. And so I think what are the conclusions here, right? What do we learn about these vendor relationships? For me, it's always been customer and vendor relationships are equal. You are their vendor does not mean you work for them. And I've always had that philosophy, and that it's a culture, right? It's a culture that everybody has to understand. People have to feel if they work for your company that they're going to be respected. I don't want anybody from my team going home feeling oh, I had to take all this from a customer because the customer's always right.
No, it's not worth it when you're this small. It's like I lived in a small town in Alaska for many, many years, and I think about the small businesses there, and I think it is like the face-to-face thing. It becomes so much clearer how the way things should work. So like in a business like that, if someone's a really problematic customer, it destroys the environment for everybody, and you just ask them to leave, right? But when it goes behind the wall of the internet, then people sort of forget that.
Well, customers are also more discerning than ever before, right? Like they think they're always right. So you're right. Like if we set the stage that, if we spoil them, if we pander to them, it doesn't help, anybody else. So I think like as a collective industry, we should be setting that standard, much higher. And I think the way that you handle customers like that is you got to educate them and you train them, right? You got to speak to them like an adult. I never speak to my customer as if I am, in theory, their vendor. Like I talk to them like a business partner. And if they disrespect our team or myself, like I'll just tell them, hey, like this is actually not acceptable.
I think also response time. You know what I mean? Like there's sort of this expectation around like everyone thinks that you should respond to every text they send you immediately or whatever. And it's okay to make people wait, especially when they're demanding and rude.
Actually, when I was responding so quickly, I mean, it would drive David insane. Right. I mean, David is also my life partner. So like, imagine for the first 2 years, I'm literally glued to my phone. Any ticket comes in, I'll respond to it. If it's tech based, I'll hand him the phone. Like we could be at a party 2 a.m. and I'm like responding to a support ticket.
Meanwhile, you'd asked me to cover support for you and be like, Melissa, stop.
That was happening. And it was just driving him insane. And he was like, you know what? I think you are taking away people's motivation to actually learn the product for themselves. Because a lot of times when you just sign up, like the chat bubbles in the corner, they just type in it. He's like, you need to not respond so quickly so they can go and learn it and discover it. So there was a time when we would artificially not respond for like a few hours. Like we would see the urgency of it. And especially if it was on the weekend, like if it was like, how do I move this button? But if it was like a more serious pressing issue, then yes, we would respond right away. But if it was like, how do I do this basic function? Like we would actually purposely not respond.
I mean, you got to set boundaries. I mean, that's one of the most important things with customers.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't respect yourself, they don't respect you. If they continue to be that way, it's not worth the pain. Unless you're paid enough for it, right? If there's someone paying you like, 100,000, whatever, 500,000 a year, like they can give you a lot more pain than someone who's giving you $100 a month.
As we were at dinner with some friends the other night, and they said they know this person who is a personal assistant that gets paid $2 million a year as a personal assistant. But they have to do everything and anything that person asks immediately. Fine. Very devil wears Prada kind of situation. But
I mean, what would you do for $2 million a year?
I mean, honestly, I could put up with that stuff for a year and then take the 2 million and run. Right. But I'm not going to stick around for that for longer than that, no matter how good the pay is. But yeah, I could do it for a year.
You work a year and that's your bootstrapping capital.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Hopefully people who are listening have learned something about, how to handle their customers. We talked about the different types of customer horror stories and why it's so important to kind of set the standard. Also to set an example for your team, right? As a leader. And know that your team, like, make sure your team knows you have their back. Like, I will let my team know, like, if anybody speaks to you that way, like, just message me privately, like, ask me to jump in. And I think they appreciate it. Like, even though you don't always hear about it, I think they appreciate also like not handling something like that, because nobody wants to get fired. Nobody wants to get in trouble. And there's a lot of things I can say as a founder that nobody else can. And I should probably be off support forever because my tolerance and patience for this kind of stuff is extremely, extremely low. Like sometimes David's just like, why are you even here?
I mean, I agree with that now. I think it's best that it's been handed off.
So what's your hot take for today?
I think especially when you're starting out, it's really easy to be fearful of customers and to bend over backwards for them. And even in the realm of feature requests, do whatever they want. And that is the wrong road to go down. It leads to disaster eventually. So, it takes practice. I think it's a skill you can learn, but don't be afraid to basically stand up to customers.
Yeah. And what's worse is overpromising just to appease them and then never delivering. Yes, we'll do that feature. Thank you for this request. Like I'm notorious for letting customers know we're just never going to build that. And here's why, right? Like, thanks for your suggestion. I don't think that's going to make it to the wish list. Like, and then people will be like, oh, but I thought you wanted feedback. It's like, yeah, but I'm talking to you like an adult. Like it's not going to happen because it's actually a really one-off case. And here's why. And, not everybody loves that. But it just is, how I do things. It's similar to yours. I mean, don't be afraid to lose customers. You're not losing customers. You are finding customers that fit your value and your culture. And that makes you feel good working for them and makes your team feel good servicing them. I think more friction is good. More friction is a filter to filter out people you don't want. And just remember, like you're running a business, right? And if someone is tough to deal with, like that is the beginning of your rest of your life with them, but they're probably not going to be great customers in the sense that they're not going to stick around for very long anyway. Like they just don't value you. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I've got a small favor to ask. The only way ProfitLed grows is by word of mouth. So if you'll do us a favor and hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening or watching this podcast right now, it'd mean the world to us and help us continue to spend time making these episodes for you. Ping me on LinkedIn if there are particular topics you want us to get into this season. Send me any feedback you have on this podcast because I love hearing from you. My name is Melissa Kwan, last name spelled Kwan. To get notified of new episodes, join our mailing list by going to ProfitLed.fm. I promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks for listening. Bye now.